Houston Real Estate Radio.
Welcome back to Houston Real Estate Radio. We're talking again with Jess Bailey from the Bailey Law Firm in the Woodlands. And we talked a couple segments ago, we talked with her about different problems with title policies and why it's important to have an attorney review your title policy. And now we're going to change gears a little bit and talk more about wills and estate planning. And there are a lot of changes going on in the economy right now. We see a lot of families moving in together, a lot of parents moving in with children and children moving in with parents. And there can be some misconceptions about what's going to happen with the property after people pass away. So we definitely want to talk about that. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Shannon.
So go ahead and tell us some of those misconceptions that people have.
Sure. So with the trend of, a lot of times the kids are moving back in with the parents, and at an older age, they're not just in their 20s, they're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. And everyone thinks, the parents and the kids, that once the parents pass away, the house will automatically go to the kids.
Yeah, that's not always the case.
Exactly. Or the kid that is living in the property. You may have 4 or 5 kids, but only one's moving in with you, and you want to give that property to one child or 2 children. And Texas states that if you don't have a will, it's the default rules of passing on property. Usually that default is not what you really want to happen. So that's why it's important to have a will.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of people that say, I don't want to have a will, I'll let my family take care of it when I'm gone. That just causes a lot of problems.
Exactly. And really, you want your family to be able to go through the grieving process and really, celebrate you and the life that you had versus cursing under their breath because you didn't take care of things and now they have to.
Well, and I think sometimes people don't want to have a will because they don't want to say this child's going to get this and this child's going to get that. They don't want to be the one to tell them what they're getting. They'd rather them just work it out themselves. But it's just not a good thing. It causes such problems between the siblings. That's just not the way you want to leave your family.
Exactly. You want to leave them peaceful. You don't want them to fight. And also a trend now is blended families and thinking that your second wife and the kids from your second marriage will automatically, the whole house, go to your second wife. If you have kids from your first marriage, they have some property right in that home. And if your second wife wants to sell it, she has to go back and get signatures from your kids to sell the property and do anything with that property.
Right. So if you don't want that to happen, you definitely need a will.
Definitely. And I think that a will is just important to make sure that you know what's going to happen. You don't have to tell your kids when they're alive what they're getting. The will is your business.
And what do you do when someone passes away? What is that whole process that you go through with the will after someone passes away?
Well, if there is a will, then you need to probate it. And this is for Texas, of course. And you don't have to have an attorney probate the will for you, but I recommend it because this way you don't have to look up the laws on notice provisions of publication of creditors, all these other little details you don't have to look up and figure out on your own. Go to an attorney who's competent in this, find someone who's done this before, and if there is no will, then you have to go through intestate probate.
That gets complicated.
Exactly, and I've done that before as well. And it's just a longer process. And also, one other thing I want to mention about wills in Texas do have specific rules on what's a will and what's not. If you tape record your will, it's not a will. According to Texas, it must be written, and there must be certain verbiage in that will for it to be recognized by the court as a will.
So definitely go to an attorney to make sure it's an official will that will be recognized by the courts.
Exactly.
And what happens if someone has a will but their spouse doesn't probate it, they don't ever do anything with it? And what are the consequences of that? Why does it need to be probated?
Well, some of the consequences is if that spouse, say 10 years later, wants to sell the property or passes away and the kids want to sell the property, they're not in the chain of title. It breaks the chain of title. So they have to go through other processes with the court, whether it's Affidavit of Airship, small states affidavit. There's different types of remedies, but they're going to take some time, and you need to talk to an attorney about your specific situation.
Right. Yeah. You definitely have to give your specific situation. One of the things, though, that I'm seeing a lot of is mom and dad own a house, dad passes away, and mom never probates the will. Now, mom passes away, and the kids are trying to probate mom's will, and they run into a lot of problems because mom never probated dad's will 20 years ago. And so now they can't sell the property until all of that's taken care of, and they're having to continue to pay the lien, to pay the mortgage on that house and the taxes and all the bills that come along with having a house until they get all of that resolved. So it's definitely important, if you know you're going to be selling your parents' house after they pass away, you want to have those things in place. So what are the preventative measures that you need to have in place?
Well, you need to, when you're married, you need to talk to your spouse about what both of your wishes are, and go to an attorney and talk with them about what your wishes are, and have it put down on paper, and have the right verbiage. Because when you get wills online, Texas has specific verbiage, and it's not always included in the wills that you can just pop in your information and a will pops out. So you want to make sure that it's legal for Texas, or else there can be contesting issues later on.
And in order to sell property in Texas, you do have to have the probated will. Is that right?
Well, if it's past that period of time for probating a will, then there's other avenues.
Okay.
But you still need to show that chain of title if the buyer wants a title commitment.
Yeah, and buyers are going to want a title commitment.
Exactly.
Very rarely that they're not. And if they don't want a title commitment, let's say it's a sibling buying it or a cousin or somebody, and they don't want that, the next buyer is going to have issues.
Exactly.
So you really need to take care of it take care of it now instead of passing it off, to the future heirs. Tell us about the Affidavit of Airship. What is that?
The Affidavit of Airship is something that can be filed in the county property records. And it says who the heirs are, and it's on record. And this is done when it's past a period of time for a will to be probated, and it can help with the chain of title. But title companies, and each one's different, have different requirements on how long that Affidavit of Airship needs to be recorded before they will give a title policy.
Okay. I think the main thing is, you need to have a will in place. And the best way to do that is get some estate planning. The more assets you have, the more complicated it gets. The fewer assets you have, it can be very simple. A lot of people don't realize how simple. It's not that expensive to have a will drawn up.
Exactly.
So I think that's very important because you don't want Texas law to be figuring out where your property is going to go after you pass away.
Right.
That can really upset people.
Yes.
Can cause a lot of problems.
Texas does not know best when it's your things.
Right. Now, if you own properties in different states and you pass away, then how do your heirs probate the will? Do they have to go to all the different states to probate? How does that work?
They probate the will in the state of your residence, and then they take that to the other states when they're trying to sell property and show the title companies in that state that you are the executor or the heir or however it was passed down to you, and why you have a right to that property. Because your property, if there's no will and you have property in 10 different states, the property in each of those states can pass differently 10 different ways if they have different laws.
That's complicated.
And that is very complicated versus having a will probated in one state and then going to those other states when you're ready to sell and say, I do have right to pass this on to someone else.
Do you have to physically go to those states and take care of that in the counties where they are, or is that something that can be done through the mail?
It's really up to the title policy companies.
Okay.
Usually you can send them proof that you're
Okay.
the executor. You usually don't have to be there. Some people do want to go just to look at the property before they sell it and pass it on. That's usually why people go to the next state, because you don't have to record it. The title company will record it.
Okay. Well, I think that, this is a topic that you can talk on for hours, obviously,
Yes.
and everybody's situation is different. And that's why you need to go and have your own estate planning done and figure out what your needs are, because everybody's needs are differently. Blended families have different needs than, families that aren't blended. And of course, the more assets you have, the more complicated it is. So I think that it's very important that you get an attorney involved, do a little estate planning, and figure out where you want things to go, because as painful as that that can be, I think it's much more painful for the kids who then have to sell the properties. And I see that all the time. I'm always have people contact me, and it's, they're in the grieving process and they need to sell the property, and it's very complicated because they've got 5 siblings who all have to agree on something, and it just becomes a mess. So I definitely think it's a good idea to take care of it ahead of time.
Definitely. And those 5 siblings may be in 5 different states.
Yeah, it gets really, really complicated. So I want to thank you for being on the show. You've been on the show with us before. It's always great to have you back. And thanks for tuning in to Houston Real Estate Radio on AM 700 KSEV. If you have a real estate question that you'd like for us to answer this week, give us a call at 281-882-8088, and we'll be happy to answer that for you on next week's show.